A broke fisherman found a Navy submarine sitting on the ocean floor off Alaska. The Navy said it sank in 1944 with all hands lost. But when he dove down and found the hidden compartment, he discovered something that made him a millionaire, and something that made the Navy very, very angry. Jack Porter was 65 years old and drowning in debt. 40 years of fishing the cold waters off Alaska, and he had nothing to show for it. His boat was old and leaking. His nets needed replacing. His wife Ellen had died 5 years back, and Jack lived alone in a cabin that needed repairs he couldn't afford. He was thinking about selling everything and moving south, giving up on the life he'd known. That's when his sonar found something strange. Jack was checking crab pots 20 miles off the coast when his equipment showed something big on the ocean floor. Something metal. Something that shouldn't be there. The water was deep here. 200 feet. Too deep for most divers. But Jack had been diving these waters for decades, knew them better than anyone. He marked the location and went home to think. Next morning he went back with his diving gear. The water was freezing even in summer. Jack's old wetsuit barely kept him warm, but he descended slowly, following his anchor line down into the dark water. At 150 feet, he saw it. A submarine, sitting upright on the ocean floor like it had been parked there, covered in rust and barnacles, but intact. The conning tower rose up like a metal mountain. Jack swam closer, his heart pounding. Found markings on the hull. USS Grayback, SS-208. He'd heard of this sub. Everyone in Alaska had. It went missing in 1944, 80 years ago. The Navy said it was sunk by Japanese ships. All 80 men aboard declared dead. But here it was. Not in Japanese waters. In Alaska. 20 miles from Jack's home port. Jack circled the sub, looking for damage. Found none. No holes. No explosions. Just a submarine sitting on the bottom like it had been placed there. He checked his air. Had maybe 20 minutes left at this depth. Started looking for a way inside. Found a hatch near the conning tower. It was sealed, but not locked. Jack pulled on it. The hatch moved. Groaned. Opened. Dark water rushed out. Jack waited for the pressure to equalize. Then he swam inside. His flashlight cut through the darkness. The inside was remarkably preserved. Cold water had kept everything from rotting. Jack swam through the control room. Saw instruments, saw charts on tables, saw personal items, photos, letters, things that told him men had lived here once, but no bodies, no remains. The sub was empty. Where had the crew gone? Jack kept exploring. Found crew quarters. Found the engine room. Found everything you'd expect on a submarine. But still no crew. No evidence of what happened. He was about to leave when he saw something. A panel on the wall. It looked different from the others. Had seams that didn't match. Jack pulled at it. The panel came away. Behind it was a compartment. Hidden. Sealed with rubber gaskets that had somehow stayed intact. Inside the compartment were metal cases. Military style. Waterproof. Jack pulled one out. It was heavy. He opened it carefully. Gold bars. The case was full of gold bars. Each one stamped with U.S. Treasury markings. Jack's hands shook. He opened another case. More gold. A third case. Still more. There had to be 20 cases in this compartment. Each one filled with gold. Jack did quick math in his head. This was millions. Maybe tens of millions. Sitting in a hidden compartment on a submarine that was supposed to be lost. Jack took one gold bar. Stuffed it in his diving bag. Then he closed the compartment carefully. Left everything else as he'd found it. He surfaced slowly, careful not to get the bends. Climbed back on his boat, shaking from cold and excitement and fear. Before you find out what Jack did next, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We have more incredible stories coming your way. That night, Jack sat in his cabin holding the gold bar. It was real, heavy and valuable and real. But where had it come from? Why was it hidden on a submarine? And why was the submarine here instead of where the Navy said it sank? Jack knew he should report this. Call the Coast Guard. Tell them about the sub. But he also knew what would happen. The Navy would take over, seal off the area, claim the gold. Jack would get nothing except maybe a thank you. He couldn't afford nothing. Not at 65 with bills piling up and a boat falling apart. Jack made a decision. He'd keep quiet about the sub. Keep diving. Take the gold. Sell it carefully. Use the money to save his life. It wasn't stealing, he told himself. The sub had been abandoned. The crew was dead. The Navy had written it off 80 years ago. Finders keepers. That's how salvage law worked. Over the next month, Jack made 10 dives. Each time he brought up 2 gold bars, hid them in his cabin. Each bar was worth maybe $50,000. Jack had $1 million in gold hidden under his floorboards. More money than he'd seen in his entire life. He sold the first bars carefully. Drove to Anchorage. Found gold dealers who didn't ask too many questions. Said he'd inherited them from his father. The dealers didn't care. Gold was gold. They paid cash. Jack paid off his boat, fixed his cabin, bought new equipment. For the first time in years, he wasn't drowning in debt. But guilt ate at him. Those bars belonged to someone. To the Navy. To the families of the lost crew, maybe. Jack told himself he'd earned them. Had risked his life diving in freezing water. Had found something everyone else had missed. But the guilt remained. Then, Jack got careless. He sold 3 bars to the same dealer in the same week. The dealer noticed. Started asking questions. Where exactly did your father get military gold bars? Why are they all from the same lot? Same date? Jack's story fell apart. The dealer called the authorities. Within a week, federal agents showed up at Jack's cabin. They had a warrant. They searched his cabin. Found the hidden gold. Found Jack's diving logs. Found everything. Jack was arrested. Charged with theft of government property. Unauthorized salvage. Violating federal maritime law. The agents seized the gold. Seized his boat. Seized everything he'd bought with the money. Jack sat in jail. 65 years old and facing federal charges. His lawyer said he could get 10 years. The Navy was furious. Not about the gold, though they wanted that back, but about Jack finding the submarine. About Jack going inside, seeing things he shouldn't have seen. The Navy sent investigators. They questioned Jack for hours. What did you see in the sub? Did you find any documents, any papers, any evidence of the crew? Jack told them the truth. The sub was empty, no crew, no bodies, just the gold hidden in a secret compartment. The investigators didn't believe him, kept pushing, kept asking about documents, about logs, about anything that might explain what happened. Finally, one investigator admitted the truth. The USS Greyback wasn't supposed to be here. It was supposed to have sunk off Japan. The Navy's official story was that Japanese ships destroyed it, but they'd never found the wreck, never had proof. For 80 years they'd assumed. Now Jack had found it, in the wrong place, with hidden gold, with no crew, with no evidence of what really happened. The Navy wanted answers, but Jack didn't have them. He'd just found a submarine and some gold. The trial took 6 months. Jack's lawyer argued salvage rights, argued that the Navy had abandoned the sub 80 years ago, argued that Jack deserved compensation for finding it. The prosecutor argued that military property never becomes abandoned, that Jack had stolen from the United States government, that he'd interfered with an official Navy investigation. The judge listened to both sides, then made his ruling. The gold belonged to the government, but Jack deserved a salvage reward. The standard was 10% of the value recovered. The gold was worth $20 million. Jack would get $2 million. After legal fees and the cost of everything the government had seized, Jack would clear about $1 million. It was less than he'd hoped for, but more than he'd ever had, and he was avoiding prison. The Navy wasn't happy. They wanted Jack prosecuted fully, but the judge said no. Jack was a fisherman who'd found something and made a mistake, not a criminal mastermind. The publicity around the case forced the Navy to investigate the submarine properly. They sent divers, sent submarines of their own, examined the USS Greyback thoroughly. What they found raised more questions than answers. The submarine had been deliberately sunk, flooded carefully, not damaged by enemy action. The crew had abandoned it. But where had they gone? And why? The Navy found documents in waterproof safes, logs that explained everything. The USS Greyback had been on a secret mission in 1944, transporting gold from Alaska to Hawaii. The gold was part of Alaska's territorial treasury, being moved because of fears Japan might invade. But the submarine had engine problems. Started taking on water. The captain made a decision. Land the crew on the Alaska coast. Sink the sub in shallow enough water to recover later. Hide the gold aboard. The crew had made it to shore, had been rescued days later, but they'd been sworn to secrecy. The mission was classified. The gold's location was classified. The crew was told to say they'd been on a different mission, to let the Navy announce the sub was lost. But the Navy never recovered the sub. The location was lost in paperwork. The crew members died over the years, taking the secret with them. The gold was forgotten, until Jack found it 80 years later. The Navy released a statement, admitted their mistake, admitted they'd lost track of the submarine and the gold, thanked Jack for finding it. But they also said all the gold now belonged to the government. Jack would get his salvage reward. Nothing more. Jack was okay with that. He took his $1 million, paid his taxes, fixed his cabin properly, bought a better boat, set himself up comfortably for retirement. But he thought often about that submarine, about the crew who'd abandoned it, about the secret they'd kept for decades, about gold hidden for 80 years waiting to be found. The story made Jack famous. Newspapers called him. Television shows wanted interviews. Everyone wanted to hear about the fisherman who'd found a lost submarine and hidden gold. Jack didn't like the attention. He was a private man, preferred the sea to people, but he agreed to a few interviews, told his story. One of those interviews changed everything. A woman called him after seeing him on television. Her name was Patricia Richardson. She was 85 years old. She said her father had been on the USS Greyback, had been part of the crew. He'd died 20 years ago, but he'd told her things before he died, things he'd been forbidden to say for decades. Jack drove to Anchorage to meet Patricia. She lived in a nursing home, sharp mind but failing body. She showed Jack photos of her father, Lieutenant Daniel Richardson, young man in a Navy uniform, smiling, alive. Patricia's eyes were wet. My father kept that secret his whole life. The submarine, the gold, what really happened. It ate at him, made him sad, but he'd sworn an oath. Even near the end, dying of cancer, he kept that oath. Only told me after making me promise never to tell anyone. Jack listened as Patricia shared her father's story. It matched what the Navy had found in the logs. Engine trouble, flooding, the decision to beach and sink the sub. But her father had added details, personal details. The crew had been terrified, sinking their own submarine, hiding the gold, abandoning their ship. They'd hiked through Alaska wilderness for 3 days before reaching a village, half frozen, starving, but alive. The Navy had picked them up, debriefed them, sworn them to secrecy, told them the submarine's location would stay classified, told them they'd be court-martialed if they ever spoke about it. Patricia's father had obeyed, had lived 50 more years never speaking of it. That's wrong. Jack's voice was angry. Those men deserved credit for what they did, for saving the gold, for surviving. Instead, they had to lie and keep secrets and live with guilt. Patricia nodded. That's why I'm talking to you now. My father's gone. His oath died with him. But the story shouldn't. Those 80 men deserve to be remembered for what they really did, not for a lie about being sunk by Japanese ships. Jack asked if she knew about the other crew members. Were any still alive? Patricia shook her head. My father was one of the youngest. All the others are dead now. Their families might not even know the truth. Jack made a decision. With Patricia's help, he'd tell the real story. Find the families of the other crew members. Let them know their fathers and grandfathers hadn't died at sea, had survived, had kept an important secret, had served with honor even if nobody could acknowledge it. Over the next year, Jack and Patricia worked together. They tracked down families, found children and grandchildren of the USS Greyback crew. Some families knew pieces of the story. Others knew nothing. All of them were grateful for the truth. Jack organized a memorial, held it near the spot where the submarine had been found. The Navy tried to stop it, said the location was still classified. Jack ignored them, said the truth mattered more than classifications. 50 family members came, children of the crew, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. They gathered on Jack's boat, said prayers, dropped flowers in the water, honored men who'd served in secret for 80 years. The Navy sent an observer, a captain who watched but said nothing. After the memorial, the captain approached Jack. Mr. Porter, what you did today was unauthorized, but it was right. Those men deserved better than they got. I'm sorry it took 80 years and a civilian to give them that. If you're wondering what happened to Jack, hit that like button and share this story with your friends. Jack asked the captain a question that had been bothering him. Why was the location of the sub really classified? The gold could have been recovered any time. Why leave it there for 80 years? The captain was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke quietly, because the mission was about more than gold. The sub was carrying other things too. Documents, codes, things that stayed classified long after the war ended. Recovery would have meant admitting those things existed. So the Navy left the sub alone. Let it be forgotten. Let the crew live with the secret. It was easier than the truth. What documents? What codes? Jack pressed. The captain shook his head. Still classified. Even now. Some secrets outlive the people who made them. The captain left. Jack stood on his boat thinking about secrets. About men who'd carried them for 50 years. About a government that valued classifications more than truth. About 80 men who'd done their duty and been erased from history because it was easier than explaining. Jack used some of his salvage money to establish a fund, the USS Greyback Memorial Fund. Its purpose was to honor the crew, to tell their real story, to support the families. Patricia Richardson helped manage it, became the public face of the family's quest for truth. They pushed the Navy to release all documents related to the submarine. Most requests were denied. Still classified. Still sensitive. Still secret 80 years later. But some documents were released. Enough to confirm the crew's story. Enough to prove the official version had been a lie. Enough to give the families peace. 2 years after finding the submarine, Jack was fishing again, back to his normal life. The money had made things easier, but he still loved the sea, still needed the work. One day his sonar picked up something, another metal object on the ocean floor, in almost the same spot as the USS Greyback. Jack's stomach dropped. He knew immediately what it was. Another submarine. He marked the location. Didn't dive. Instead, he called the Navy directly, told them what he'd found, told them exactly where, said he wasn't going near it. They could handle it. The Navy sent a team within days. They investigated, confirmed Jack's finding. It was another submarine, Japanese, from World War II, sitting 500 feet from where the USS Greyback had been. The Navy divers found evidence of battle damage. The Japanese sub had been sunk, probably by the Greyback before it had engine trouble. That's why they'd been in these waters. They'd been fighting. The Greyback had won, but been damaged, had limped to the Alaska coast, had made the decision to sink rather than let the submarine or its cargo fall into enemy hands if it sank uncontrolled. The Navy released a statement, credited the USS Greyback with sinking the Japanese submarine, credited Jack with finding both wrecks, said the complete story could now be told. The crew of the USS Greyback were heroes, had fought, had won, had saved their cargo, had survived against odds. They deserved full military honors. A ceremony was held in Pearl Harbor. Patricia Richardson and other family members attended. The Navy posthumously awarded medals to the crew, recognized their service publicly for the first time. Jack was invited, but he didn't go. Didn't want the attention. He'd done what he needed to do. Found the truth. Helped the families. That was enough. But he watched the ceremony on television, saw the families crying with pride and relief, saw the Navy finally doing right by men they'd erased for 80 years. Jack thought about the gold, about $2 million he'd kept from finding it. Blood money, some people called it. Stolen property. Jack didn't agree. He'd found something forgotten, had risked his life to recover it, had earned that money. But he also understood the family's feelings. Their fathers and grandfathers had protected that gold, had kept it secret, had suffered for it. In a way, the gold belonged to them, more than it belonged to Jack. Jack made a decision. He donated half his money to the memorial fund, $1 million for the families, for scholarships and support and keeping the story alive. Patricia Richardson cried when he told her, "Mr. Porter, you don't have to do this. The gold was yours. You found it fairly." Jack shrugged. "Your father and the others protected it, kept the secret, suffered for decades. I just found it and got lucky. This feels right." The donation made news. Jack became a hero again. The generous fisherman, the man who'd given away a fortune to honor dead sailors. Jack hated the attention but accepted it. Sometimes good deeds came with publicity. That was the price of doing right. 3 years after finding the submarine, Jack was 68. His health was declining. Heart problems. The doctor said years of hard work and cold water had taken their toll. Jack sold his boat. Retired for real this time. Spent his days in his cabin, reading, thinking, remembering. Patricia Richardson visited him. She was 88 now. They'd become friends through this strange journey. She brought him a gift, a photo of her father and his crew, the USS Greyback crew in 1943. Young men, smiling, alive. On the back, Patricia had written something. These men kept a secret for their country, suffered in silence for their duty, were forgotten by history until Jack Porter remembered them. Thank you for giving them back their honor. Jack put the photo on his wall, looked at it every day, thought about those young men, about the secret they'd carried, about the sacrifice nobody had acknowledged, about being forgotten by the country they'd served. He thought about his own life too. 68 years of hard work, 40 years on the cold sea, a wife he'd loved and lost, a life that had been ordinary until one day his sonar found something impossible. One discovery had changed everything, had made him rich, had made him famous, but more importantly, had let him do something meaningful, had let him give 80 forgotten men their honor back. That mattered more than money, more than fame, more than anything. 5 years after finding the submarine, Jack was 70 and barely leaving his cabin. His heart was weak. The doctor said he had maybe a year. Jack was okay with that. He'd lived a full life, seen things most people never saw, done something that mattered. He was ready, but he had one more thing to do, one more secret to share. Jack called Patricia Richardson, asked her to visit, brought her lawyer too. When they arrived, Jack showed them something he'd kept hidden, a journal, waterproof, recovered from the USS Greyback during one of his dives. He'd never told anyone about it, not the Navy, not the investigators, not anyone. Why did you keep this? Patricia's voice shook. Why didn't you turn it in? Jack looked at the journal. Because I read it, and what I read made me understand why your father and the others kept their secret, made me understand why the Navy wanted things to stay buried. This journal tells the whole truth, not the sanitized version, the real story, and it's not pretty. Patricia opened the journal carefully, read the first few entries. Her face went pale. Oh God, this changes everything. The journal belonged to the USS Greyback's captain, Captain William Morrison. He'd written it during the submarine's final mission, detailed everything that happened. The journal confirmed the basic story: engine trouble, the decision to sink, the crew's survival. But it added something the Navy had left out. The gold wasn't just territorial treasury. It was payment. The submarine had been transporting gold to pay for classified operations. Operations that involved things the government didn't want known. Testing, experiments, things done in Alaska during the war that couldn't be acknowledged. The gold was payment to keep people quiet, to compensate for damages, to hide truths that were ugly and wrong. Captain Morrison had written about his disgust, about following orders he thought were immoral, about protecting gold that represented suffering and silence. He'd written about his crew's anger, about men who'd volunteered to serve their country finding out they were protecting secrets that shouldn't exist. That's why the Navy really classified the mission. Patricia understood now, not because of codes or documents, because of what the gold represented, because admitting where it came from would mean admitting what they did in Alaska during the war. Jack nodded. Your father and the others knew. That's why the secret ate at them. They weren't just hiding a submarine location. They were hiding government crimes. Patricia read more of the journal, found entries about specific incidents, about people hurt by the experiments, about families paid off with gold to stay quiet, about the captain's growing horror at what he was part of. The final entry was written the day they sank the submarine. We're leaving this ship and this gold at the bottom of the sea. Maybe someday someone will find it. Maybe someday the truth will come out. But if I have my way, this gold stays buried forever. Blood money from blood crimes. Let it rust on the ocean floor. That's all it deserves. Patricia closed the journal, tears on her face. My father knew all this, carried it his whole life. Couldn't even tell me the worst parts. Just said he'd done things he wasn't proud of, things he had to keep secret. Now I understand. Jack, what do we do with this? Jack had thought about that for 5 years. We have choices. We can turn it over to the Navy. Let them bury it again. Classify it for another 80 years. Or we can make it public. Tell the whole truth. Expose what happened. But that will hurt people. Living people whose parents or grandparents were involved. Patricia thought for a long time. Finally, she spoke. My father kept the secret because he'd been ordered to, because he believed in duty and chain of command. But he also suffered for it, died with guilt he couldn't share. I don't think he'd want us to keep hiding it. I think he'd want the truth out, even if it's ugly, even if it hurts. Jack agreed. They took the journal to a historian, someone they trusted, someone who specialized in World War II operations in Alaska. The historian read it and confirmed their fears. What Captain Morrison described matched rumors, stories that had circulated for decades but never been proven, stories about experiments on soldiers, about testing on isolated communities, about paying people to stay quiet about what they'd seen. The historian helped them verify facts, cross-reference dates and locations, build a case that the journal was authentic. Then they made it public, published it with full context, with explanations, with apologies to anyone who'd been hurt by the revelations. The response was bigger than they'd expected. Other families came forward, said their grandparents had been part of the experiments, had been paid to stay quiet, had carried guilt and trauma for decades. Documents were released, records were unsealed. The truth came out slowly, but it came. The government was forced to acknowledge what had happened, to apologize, to compensate families. It wasn't enough. Nothing could fix 80 years of hidden trauma and suppressed truth, but it was something. Jack testified before another congressional committee, told them about finding the journal, about Captain Morrison's disgust and guilt, about the crew who'd protected blood money, about why secrets like this should never be kept. Some committee members thanked him. Others accused him of hurting national security, of damaging the military's reputation. Jack didn't care. He was dying. He had nothing to lose by telling the truth. Patricia Richardson testified too, spoke about her father's suffering, about decades of carrying guilt for something he'd been ordered to do, about dying without being able to confess or find peace. She demanded the government do better. Stop hiding crimes behind classifications. Stop asking soldiers to carry impossible secrets. Treat service members with the respect they deserved. If you're still following Jack's story, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss how this ends. The hearings led to new laws, requirements for declassification, time limits on how long secrets could be kept, protections for whistleblowers who exposed wrongdoing. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Jack watched it happen from his cabin, too sick to travel, but satisfied he'd done something meaningful. He'd found a submarine and hidden gold, but more importantly, he'd helped free people from 80 years of enforced silence. That mattered more than any amount of money. 6 months after making the journal public, Jack had a visitor, a Navy admiral, high-ranking. The admiral came alone. No staff, no ceremony, just an old man in uniform visiting another old man in a cabin. Admiral. Jack gestured to a chair. The admiral sat, looked uncomfortable. Mr. Porter, I've been sent to deliver a message from the Chief of Naval Operations. What you did, releasing that journal, it hurt us. Hurt the Navy's reputation, hurt recruiting, hurt relationships with allies. I know. Jack wasn't apologetic. It also told the truth. Sometimes truth hurts. The admiral nodded slowly. You're right. And privately, many of us agree with you. What happened in Alaska was wrong. Keeping it secret for 80 years was wrong. You did us a favor by forcing it into the open, even if it doesn't feel like a favor now. Why are you really here? Jack asked. The admiral pulled an envelope from his pocket. Because the Navy owes you. Not officially. We can't publicly thank you for exposing our crimes. But privately, person to person, you deserve recognition. Inside this envelope is a letter from the Chief of Naval Operations, thanking you, acknowledging what you did. It's not official. It'll never be made public. But we wanted you to know that some of us understand. Some of us are grateful. Jack took the envelope, opened it, read the letter. It was brief, handwritten, personal. It acknowledged the crimes, thanked Jack for his courage, promised the Navy would do better. Jack folded it carefully, put it in his pocket. Thank you. This means something. The admiral stood, saluted. Jack Porter, you've served your country more than many people who wear the uniform. You've done so with honor and courage. You've sacrificed your privacy and your peace for truth. That's the highest form of service. The admiral left. Jack sat alone in his cabin holding the letter, thinking about service and sacrifice, about the USS Grayback crew, about Captain Morrison's guilt, about Patricia Richardson's father, about all the people who'd suffered for secrets. He'd helped free them. That was his legacy. 1 month later, Jack Porter died, peacefully in his sleep. Heart failure. He was 70 years old, had lived long enough to see the truth come out, to see justice done, to see families freed from enforced silence. Patricia Richardson organized his funeral, held it on the water, the way Jack would have wanted. Navy representatives came. So did family members of the USS Grayback crew. So did people whose grandparents had been hurt by the Alaska experiments. They all honored Jack, the fisherman who'd found impossible truth, who'd had the courage to share it, who'd changed history by refusing to keep quiet. Patricia spoke at the funeral. Jack Porter was an ordinary man, a fisherman, not educated, not powerful, not connected, but he had something rare. He had integrity. When he found that submarine, he could have taken the gold and stayed quiet. Instead, he dug deeper, found uncomfortable truths, shared them despite the cost. He gave 80 men their honor back. He gave countless families their truth back. He proved that one person can change things, can force accountability, can demand better from institutions that want to hide. That's Jack's legacy. Not the gold he found, not the money he made, but the truth he told and the courage he showed. They scattered Jack's ashes over the spot where he'd found the USS Grayback, where everything had started. The water was calm. The sun was setting. It felt right. Jack was home, in the cold Alaska waters he'd fished for 40 years, near the submarine that had changed his life, near the truth that had mattered more than treasure. 10 years after Jack's death, his story had become legend. Books were written. A movie was made. The man who'd found the submarine and the hidden gold and the uncomfortable truth. Schools taught about him, about integrity and courage and choosing truth over comfort. Patricia Richardson was 95, still sharp, still fighting. She'd taken Jack's mission and expanded it. The Memorial Fund had become the Maritime Truth Foundation. Its purpose was finding hidden histories, exposing classified secrets that should no longer be secret, demanding accountability from government institutions. Patricia had become a national advocate for transparency, for treating veterans honestly, for ending the culture of hiding mistakes behind classifications. She testified before Congress regularly, pushed for more declassification, more honesty, more respect for the people who served. Some politicians loved her, others hated her. She didn't care. She was 95, had nothing to lose, would keep fighting until she died. The foundation had uncovered 6 more submarines, all from World War II, all with hidden cargo, all with crews who'd been sworn to secrecy. Not all the cargo was gold. Some was documents. Some was equipment. Some was evidence of operations the government had wanted forgotten. Each discovery led to more truth, more families getting answers, more accountability. The Navy had learned to cooperate, had learned that fighting Patricia Richardson and her foundation was harder than just releasing information. They'd established a declassification office, worked with the foundation, released documents when appropriate, acknowledged mistakes when necessary. It wasn't perfect. Some things stayed classified. Some secrets stayed hidden, but progress was being made. More truth was coming out. Patricia received an award from the president for her lifetime of advocacy, for forcing institutions to be better, for honoring veterans by demanding honesty. She accepted the award in Jack's name, said none of this would have happened without the fishermen who'd refused to keep quiet. 20 years after Jack's death, Patricia Richardson died. She was 105, had outlived everyone from her father's generation, had spent the last 23 years of her life fighting for truth. Her funeral was attended by thousands, veterans, families, politicians, representatives from every branch of military. They all honored her, the woman who'd taken her father's secret and turned it into a movement, who'd demanded better from her country, who'd proven that civilians could hold military institutions accountable. Patricia was buried at sea, like Jack, near the spot where the USS Grayback had been found, near where everything had started. The water was cold and calm, the sun bright. It felt right. Patricia was home, with her father's memory, with Jack's legacy, with all the people who'd suffered for secrets and finally found peace and truth. The foundation continued. Patricia's grandchildren took over, continued the work, continued finding hidden histories, continued demanding accountability. The mission lived on, generation after generation, all because a broke fisherman had found a submarine and refused to stay quiet. 30 years after Jack's death, the last survivor of the USS Greyback crew's immediate families passed away. Patricia's daughter, she was 75, had spent her whole life hearing about the submarine, about the secret, about the sacrifice. Before she died, she established a permanent endowment, funded by the Memorial Fund's growth. Its purpose was to ensure the story never died, never got forgotten. Every generation would learn about the USS Greyback, about the crew who'd kept impossible secrets, about the fisherman who'd freed them, about the daughter who'd demanded justice. The endowment funded scholarships for students studying history, for descendants of veterans, for anyone committed to transparency and accountability. Hundreds of students benefited. All of them learned Jack's story. All of them understood that one person could change things. That integrity mattered more than following orders. That truth was worth protecting even when it cost everything. 40 years after Jack's death, the Alaska government erected a memorial, not just to Jack, but to everyone affected by the hidden experiments. The people who'd been tested on, the families who'd been paid to stay quiet, the crew of the USS Greyback who'd protected blood money. All of them honored together. All of them finally acknowledged. The memorial was simple. A wall with names, a plaque explaining what happened, a promise that this would never happen again, that people mattered more than secrets, that accountability was more important than reputation. Thousands visited every year, stood in silence, read the names, understood that government power came with responsibility, that service members and civilians deserved respect, that hiding crimes was wrong no matter how classified they were. 50 years after Jack's death, his cabin was preserved, made into a small museum. People could visit, see where he'd lived, see the gold bar he'd kept as a reminder, see the photo of the USS Greyback crew, see Captain Morrison's journal in a protective case, see the letter from the Chief of Naval Operations thanking him privately for his courage. Visitors left notes, messages to Jack. Thank you for telling the truth. Thank you for not staying quiet. Thank you for proving one person can make a difference. The museum became a pilgrimage site for veterans who'd been asked to keep secrets, for families who'd lost loved ones to classified operations, for anyone who believed in accountability. They all came to honor Jack, the ordinary fisherman who'd done something extraordinary. 100 years after Jack found the submarine, his story was still being told, still taught in schools, still inspiring people to choose truth over comfort, to demand accountability from power, to believe that one person could change the world. The submarine itself was raised, carefully, preserved, put in a naval museum. Visitors could walk through it, see where the crew had lived, see where the gold had been hidden, understand the impossible secret these men had carried. The museum was always crowded. People wanted to touch history, wanted to connect with Jack's story, wanted to understand that truth was worth fighting for. The gold was long gone, returned to the government, used to compensate families affected by the experiments. But replicas were displayed, showing what Jack had found, what had started everything. Next to the replicas was a photo of Jack, 65 years old, weathered face, honest eyes, a fisherman who'd changed history because he refused to look away. The story had become legend, but it was true legend, real history, documented and verified, not myth but fact. That made it more powerful, made it more inspiring. Anyone could be Jack Porter. Anyone could find something wrong and choose to expose it. Anyone could demand truth. Anyone could change things. That was the lesson. That was what mattered. 150 years after Jack found the submarine, humanity had spread beyond Earth. Colonies on Mars, stations in deep space. The universe had opened up. But people still told Jack's story, still taught it in schools across the solar system, still used it as an example of integrity and courage, because the lesson was timeless. Power would always want to hide mistakes. Institutions would always prefer comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. But individuals could resist, could demand accountability, could force change. Jack Porter proved that. One broke fisherman against the United States Navy. One ordinary man against classified secrets and government power. He'd won, not because he was special, but because he refused to quit, because he believed truth mattered more than comfort. That lesson traveled to the stars with humanity. That lesson shaped how colonies were governed, how institutions were held accountable, how secrets were handled. No classification could last forever. No truth could be buried permanently. Someone would always find it. Someone would always have the courage to share it. And when they did, humanity would remember Jack Porter, the fisherman who'd found a submarine, who'd discovered hidden gold, who'd uncovered uncomfortable truths, who'd refused to stay quiet, who'd changed everything by simply doing what was right. His cabin still stood after 150 years, preserved as a monument, protected as a historical site. People made pilgrimages across space to visit it, to stand where Jack had stood, to see the cold Alaska waters where he'd fished, to honor the place where one man had chosen integrity over wealth, chosen truth over comfort, chosen courage over silence. The water was still cold. The mountains still stood. Alaska hadn't changed much despite centuries. That felt right. Jack's story was rooted in this place, in these cold waters, in this hard land that bred hard people, people who valued honesty because nothing else could survive here, people who demanded truth because lies froze and died in this climate. Jack had been a product of Alaska, shaped by its coldness and beauty and unforgiving nature. He'd carried those qualities into his fight with the Navy, had been as unyielding as the mountains, as persistent as the tides, as honest as the brutal cold, and he'd won. 200 years after Jack found the submarine, the last person who'd known him personally died. A distant cousin, he was 98, had met Jack once when he was a child, barely remembered him, but he'd carried Jack's story his whole life, told it to anyone who'd listen, made sure it didn't die with his generation. Before he died, he recorded a message for future generations who'd never met anyone who'd known Jack. He wanted them to understand that Jack had been real, not a myth, not a legend, just a man, an ordinary, broke, lonely fisherman who'd made extraordinary choices. I met Jack Porter when I was 7 years old. The cousin's recorded voice was clear despite his age. He was just a fisherman, smelled like the sea, had rough hands, didn't talk fancy, but when he looked at you, you knew he was someone special, not because he was educated or powerful, but because he was honest. Completely, totally honest. He couldn't tell a lie if he tried. That's what made him different. That's what let him change the world. He found something wrong, and he couldn't pretend he hadn't seen it. Couldn't stay quiet. Couldn't take the money and forget. His honesty wouldn't let him. That's the lesson. That's what we should remember. Not that Jack was a hero, but that Jack was honest. And honesty, real honesty, is the most powerful force in the universe. It can topple governments. It can expose crimes. It can change history. All because one person refuses to lie. Be like Jack. Be honest even when it costs you. Tell the truth even when it hurts. Do what's right even when it's hard. That's how you change things. That's how you matter. The message was played at schools across human civilization. Billions of people heard it, were inspired by it. Some of them went on to expose wrongs, to demand accountability, to choose integrity over comfort. Each of them carried a piece of Jack's legacy. Each of them proved that one person could still change things. That truth still mattered. That courage still counted. 300 years after Jack found the submarine, his name was carved on a memorial on Mars, the first human colony's founders' memorial, listing people whose examples had inspired the colonists, who'd shown humanity what it could be. Jack Porter's name was there. Fisherman, truth-teller, ordinary hero. Proved that integrity matters. Proved that one person can force change. Proved that truth is worth more than gold. Colonists visited the memorial, read the names, learned the stories. Jack's story resonated especially with people building new societies. They understood that institutions needed accountability, that power needed oversight, that truth needed protection. They built those principles into their colony's founding documents, made sure no government could hide crimes behind classifications, made sure no institution could silence truth-tellers, made sure people like Jack would always be protected, not punished. That was Jack's real legacy, not the money he'd made, not the submarine he'd found, but the example he'd set. The proof that ordinary people could demand better from their leaders, could force accountability, could change the world by simply refusing to stay quiet when they saw something wrong. 400 years after Jack found the submarine, humanity had spread across the galaxy. Thousands of worlds, billions of people, diverse cultures and governments. But they all knew Jack Porter's story, all taught it, all honored it, because the lesson was universal. Power corrupts. Institutions hide mistakes. Secrets protect the guilty. But individuals can resist, can demand truth, can force change. Jack Porter proved it. One broke fisherman in cold Alaska waters. One ordinary man against the United States Navy. One honest choice that echoed through centuries, through the expansion across the solar system, through humanity's spread to the stars, through 400 years of growth and change and progress. Jack's story survived. Jack's lesson endured. Jack's courage inspired generation after generation after generation, because truth was timeless, integrity was universal, and courage, real courage, was choosing what was right even when it cost everything. That's what Jack had done. That's what he'd taught humanity. That's why he mattered, not because he'd found gold, but because he'd found truth and had the courage to share it. That was worth more than any treasure. That was the real discovery, and it lasted forever. The cold Alaska water still flowed where Jack had fished. The mountains still stood where he'd lived. The submarine was long preserved in museums. The gold was long dispersed to families who deserved it. But Jack's integrity remained. His honesty endured. His courage inspired. That was his treasure. That was what he'd found beneath the waves. Not gold, but the strength to do what was right, the courage to tell the truth, the integrity to demand accountability. That treasure was infinite. That treasure was eternal. That treasure was worth more than anything money could buy. And humanity carried it to the stars.